seat. Welcome to today's Open Government Symposium. My name is Brian Miller. I'm the chair of the Douglas County Tea Party. We're going to start today off in prayer, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. Leslie Golden is going to lead us in prayer, so if everyone could please stand.
May we bow our heads? Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the many blessings that you bestowed upon us. We thank you for this gathering that we have today, Heavenly Father. Touch the speaker, give him the words for us to get the understanding. Lord God, bless each and every person that is here. Bless their families, touch them from the top of their head down to the soles of their feet, Heavenly Father. Lord God, let us get the understanding that we may have the knowledge. Lord God, we thank you for those who put this together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to thank everybody for coming. We have a great mix of folks here today. We have elected officials, other public officials, along with a lot of citizens. If you are an elected official, could you please stand up? We can give everyone a round of applause for coming. The Douglas County Tea Party has always been a big advocate for open government here in Douglas County, and so we're very happy that we were able to bring this to close to home. When I heard about how well this had done in Valdosta, I reached out to Jim Zachary, who will be putting on our presentation today, and asked him if he could come to Douglas County. And it was funny, he said that Richard Siegel, who runs the Facebook page he'll talk about in a minute, he said that he had already heard from Richard Siegel and he had also heard from the newspaper. So he said, can you all get together and talk to each other and coordinate this thing? So that's what we did. We appreciate Jim coming, and Richard's going to briefly talk about his page. We have some information about the Douglas County Tea Party in front of each of your chairs. Would encourage you to look at that and get involved with the community.
Thank you, Brian. I'll be real brief because I really want to get started with what's going on here. The Facebook page, Douglasville and Douglas County for Civic Action, has one goal. That is for the citizens to be informed and involved. That's the motto of the page: get informed, get involved. Because you don't know if what your government is doing is right or wrong if you don't know what they're doing. If you're not getting involved, go to the meetings. Do open records requests. How do you do that? Well, this is the perfect venue to find out how. That's why I was very excited to find out about these symposia and wanted to have one here to help citizens learn, but also to have that interaction with the elected officials, the media, everybody who has an interest in knowing what's going on. So that's that page. It's focused on Douglasville and Douglas County, but I think the lessons learned there apply to any county, any city. And I'd love to see pages like that pop up in other communities as well. Anyway, enough with me, enough with my page. If you hear gunfire, by the way, there is a shooting range downstairs. Sure. Bullets hardly ever come up through the floor, so don't worry. So without further ado, it's my distinct honor and privilege to introduce, for some opening remarks, the chairman of the Douglas County Commission, Mr. Tom Worthen.
And on behalf of the Douglas County Board of Commissioners, I want to say thank you for being here and welcome, especially those who do not live here in Douglas County. We're so proud to have this program. I have a couple of commissioners I have to tell who they are. Ann Jones-Guider's here today. Mike Mulcair is here today. And our county administrator, Mark Till, is here. So I'm not going to be able to stay. I've had a death in the family. Oh, I'm sorry, Henry. I'm sorry. Mr. Mitchell slipped in on me. I didn't see him over there. But we're proud to have that much representation here because we certainly believe in open government. We feel that we have an open government. We feel that our government's transparent. But you know, there's always new ways to learn to communicate with our citizens. So that's the reason we're here. Thank y'all for being here. Thank you for bringing the program to Douglas County, and a lot of people had something to do with that. And these two guys right here are responsible, and we thank you. But sorry, I can't stay with you. Roy says he's going to film it and put it on Facebook or YouTube. So I'll get to look at it anyway, but I'm sure the commissioners will advise me as to what went on in today's program. Again, welcome to Douglas County. Thank you for being here, and we hope we learned something today so we can better communicate with our citizens. Thank you.
Let's go ahead and get started with the program. We have here Jim Zachary of the Georgia Transparency Project, amongst other things, and he will take it over from here.
Okay, I want to say hello very quickly, and my friend that just left is Holly Manheimer, and Holly is the executive director of the Georgia First Amendment Foundation, and Holly is going to be back. But we promised you guys some free materials, and through miscommunication, neither one of us brought them, so she's going to get the materials, and she will be back. But in the interest of transparency, we forgot the books. But you will get the books before we get through. There are a lot of things that we're going to talk about, none of which are more important than the principles of open government. We want to do our best to answer your questions, and we want to be as informative as we can be with respect to the Georgia Open Meetings Act and the Georgia Open Records Act. But there are principles about open government that go beyond what the law says. In order for government to ever really be of, by, and for the people, it's got to be out in front of the people. Thomas Jefferson once called information the currency of democracy. We are true believers. And I'm not going to make any apology for that. We believe that what we are talking about as we carry these open government symposiums across the state of Georgia, and this is the fourth in the open government series, that all the business of government is your business. That everything that government does, everything that government does is the people's business. That every decision that government reaches is your decision. That every piece of business that government deliberates is about you. That every penny that government spends is your money. We are not against government. And Holly and I do our best to make it very clear as we travel around the state, as we talk to groups that are made up of government officials, talk to groups that are made up of watchdog groups in a community, talk to journalists, which we find ourselves talking to a lot, which is, by the way, the reason I was almost late is because I was talking to a room full of journalists. That we are not against government. We're for people. And government's people too. I want y'all to think a lot about democracy, to think a lot about freedom, to think a lot about what our form of government is, our constitutional republic, our own little brand of democracy is about a representative form of government where we do not elect people to rule us, we do not elect people to think for us, we elect people to represent us. And so what we're talking about when we go around and talk about open government is about conducting our business and keeping our records out in front of us. You know, if you work in the private sector, you might answer to a board of directors or to a CEO, to your company, and your company has full rights to every piece of information that you have on your office computer. Your company has full rights and full access to every file that you have in your filing cabinets because you're working for them. Every county clerk's office, every central office in our school administration is accountable to its board of directors. And its board of directors are the residents, the taxpayers, the citizens. And that's what this is all about. I'll also be very candid in the fact that Georgia does not have the worst sunshine laws in the United States, but it doesn't have the best either. We're probably somewhere short of middle. There's a lot of room for growth. There's a lot of room for improvement. There's a lot that we could be doing better in the state of Georgia. Through the First Amendment Foundation, the Transparency Project of Georgia, we're doing our best to be a part of lobbies in our General Assembly to advocate for greater openness in government. But I want y'all to think about something with me. How ridiculous is it? How unreasonable is it? How absolutely crazy is it that we need laws to tell our government to be open? We need laws to tell government to give us what belongs to us. We need laws to tell government to do their business out in front of us. Why should we have to have laws? Why would we have to ratify a code in the General Assembly to tell government to give us our stuff? But we do. We have a very detailed code, both for open records and open meetings, that tell us what we have access to, and unfortunately, what we do not have access to. We have laws to tell us what meetings we can go to, and unfortunately, we have laws that tell us the meetings that we cannot go to. But we have what we have right now. I believe that it is up to you, and by you I mean every last one of you, all of us. It is up to us as a citizenry, as a community, to create a culture of openness in the great state of Georgia. We hope by going around to different communities and talking to groups just like this, that we will send a strong message to community, that we will send a strong message to local government, we will send a message to county commissions, we will send a message to city councils, we will send a message to boards of education, and also to committees and agencies and authorities, and most importantly to the Georgia General Assembly, that we expect the people's business to be open. And we have no reason to expect otherwise. But while we're doing that, for those of you that really care about open government, for those of you that actively pursue records and access to meetings in your community, I beg you to realize something. Every single member of your county commission, every single member of your city council, every single person that works in county and city administrative offices or at the central office of the public school district, every records custodian, every last one of them has one thing in common. They are people too. They're human beings. They have feelings. They get upset. they get backed into a corner. They get irritated, aggravated, agitated. Maybe they shouldn't, but there's a reason why sometimes they get irritated. They're human beings. Sometimes you get irritated, you get agitated, you get aggravated. It is not our job, and you should not see it as your job in a community to prove you're right. Because this is not about the war. It's not about the battle. It's not about winning. It's not even about Charlie Sheen. It's about the records. It's about the tax documents. It's about the codes. And it's about what they're doing back there in those doggone doors with the doors closed. So don't just fight a fight to fight a fight. Bullies never win in the long run. And there's no need to bully your government. As a matter of fact, I found out more often than not that when we treat government like we treat one another, like human beings, that all of a sudden some of the problems that we have with government start to slowly dissipate. We need to learn to talk to each other and to communicate in ways that are productive and realize that, yeah, sometimes government officials are a little terse. And sometimes so are non-government officials a little terse. And sometimes they're a little bit slow. And if y'all want to see slow, come to my newsroom sometime. I'll show you slow. Sometimes they're not as responsive as they could be, would be, should be. But let's do our best to advocate for openness and transparency without always picking a fight. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I'm not going to shrink back from a fight for right. But it's not about who's right. It's about what's right. I need a volunteer. Now, most of this crowd is a relatively new crowd for me. Usually when I go around the state, I have to give all these caveats. You can't work for me. You cannot have used to have worked for me. You could not have ever applied for a job and then didn't get hired by me. But in this crowd, I don't think I have to do that. I have an envelope, and I need somebody to hold on to it for me for a little while. Got to volunteer. And I love happy volunteers. Now, what I want you to do is look at the contents of the envelope. Don't show him because he's looking over your shoulder. He's cheating off your paper. It's only for you. I just want you to look at the contents of the envelope, and all I want you to do today is at the right time do the right thing. That's all I want you to do is at the right time do the right thing. Well, that should be enough about that for now. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're going to do today. We're going to talk a little bit about the broad stroke principles of open government with respect to the Open Meetings Law. Then we're going to talk a little bit about open government with respect to the Open Records Law. And then we're going to sit down for a little while and field questions. As we do that, I encourage you to stay focused on why we're here. Because we're not here to deal with every single cause. Our principles are the cause of open government. So, if you can, keep your questions targeted to those issues as they pertain to open government. But let me tell you what I found out after a lifetime of doing this. After 30 years of doing this, and I know that's hard to believe, but I was 6 when I started. That just about every single issue. This may surprise some of our government officials. By the way, I want to pause just for a quick and applaud all of our government officials for being a part of this process and for caring about open government. Thank you. You may not always like what you hear from advocates, but your willingness to hear it means more than what we could possibly articulate. Here's what may be surprising. If you really think about all the issues that people have with government, and we got issues, right? If you think about all the issues that people have with government, when you boil them down, when you strip them away, when you look at their common denominators, just about every issue that people have with government boils down to a transparency issue. Don't like the tax structure. It's all about transparency. Don't like what's hidden in the budget. It's all about transparency. Don't like overreach and new regulations for government. Where'd they come from? It's all about transparency. The more clandestine government operates, here's my best advice to government. The more clandestine, the more secretive government operates, the more suspicious citizens become. When Holly gets back, we hope she's not speeding, we're going to talk some about executive session. Holly, you will notice this if you play this game with me, unless she tells you up front, refuses to use the words executive session. She just refuses to use the words. I asked her one time about it. I said, Holly, why won't you say executive session? She said, because that's not what it is. I said, what is it? She said, it's a closed door meeting. But let me tell you about those closed doors. I've got a glass front to my office. And every now and then, one of my employees wants to talk. Usually that means it's going to be a bad day. But they will come into my office and close the door. The minute that door is closed, all the little people in their cubicles pop up. And they looking and looking. And then all of a sudden, people start like walking nonchalantly over toward my glass wall. Any day now, I expect one of them to come to work with a drinking glass and just put it up. There's something about that closed door that makes people want to know and makes them think something bad's going on. I've got one young superstar in my newsroom. She's a 22-year-old girl, graduated college at 20, is an editor in my newsroom and a shining star in Georgia journalism. She's going to set the world on fire. I just hope I can keep her for a few years. Never been in trouble a single day at work. Got another editor. He's like me, he's old as the hills. He came into my office the other day, shut the door, wanted to talk. He wanted to talk about the SNL, the Saturday Night Live 40-year special, just so y'all know the secret. After he left, she comes in my office and she said, am I in trouble? I said, well, you've never been in trouble. What do you mean you're in trouble? She said, well, every time that door's closed, I'm afraid that something's up. Can you hear me? Yeah. I'm telling county commissions, I'm telling city councils, I'm telling boards of education, I'm telling authorities, every time you close the door, folks think something's up, whether it is or not. Here's a surprise. There is no provision in state law that requires executive session. ever. By ever, I mean ever, ever. I mean government officials are never required to go behind closed doors ever. That every single time an executive session takes place, with all due respect to Holly Manheimer, every time there is a closed door session, it is a choice. It is a conscious choice. If county, city, Board of Education attorneys say that it is a requirement, they are wrong. The state's leading authority on the First Amendment and open government is a distinguished gentleman by the name of David Hudson. If you want to know anything about open meetings and open records in the state of Georgia, and you want the single most authoritative source, the name you need to know is David Hudson. David is a very distinguished part of the legal community in the state of Georgia, and at the risk of alienating many of his colleagues, last year made a very bold statement that the reason so many county commissions and boards of education and city councils believe that they are required to go into executive session is because their attorneys told them so. The state of Georgia allows executive session, but it does not require it. The state of Georgia permits executive session under very, very specific circumstances. But even when that happens, it is a choice. Now, what Georgia tells us is that there are 3 reasons that local government can go into executive session. By the way, what I'm not going to talk about today is the biggest faux pas in the state of Georgia and most states with respect to the Sunshine Law. I'm not going to call out the name of the government entity that exempts themselves from the Sunshine Law, but the initials are the General Assembly. They will require of local government what they won't do themselves. But for 3 reasons, the General Assembly has said, local governments may go behind closed doors to talk about pending litigation, to talk about real estate transactions, and to talk about personnel issues. Do you know that not every state allows that? Let's talk about, for instance, real estate. Georgia allows governments, if they're going to buy or lease a piece of real estate, that you can go into executive session and talk about the terms of that purchase or that lease. If you ask local officials, why do you do that? They'll say, well, number one, we have to, which is not true. And then they'll say, well, number two, if we didn't, we might lose the deal. And I've listened to that all my born days. So tell me this, if you're going to lose the deal, if you talk about the terms of a lease of a piece of property in Georgia, why wouldn't you do it if you did it in Tennessee? It just doesn't make sense. But the state does say that they can do it. So we can't really argue about whether or not you're breaking the law if you talk about real estate transaction, unless you're using that as an umbrella to talk about real estate purchases and leases in general, and the state does not allow that. So the state says that you can, if for instance you have a piece of property that you're going to purchase, to talk about the terms of the negotiated price for that property, talk about that in executive session. But the county commission, for example, cannot get together and have a closed-door session, talk about the fact that they need to enter into a program where they're going to be purchasing real estate over the course of the next 3 months. Can't do that. That's not a real estate transaction. Nor can they go behind closed doors and say, you know what, we've got all this property that we've acquired over the years and it's scattered all over the county. We need to figure out if we're going to consolidate that property or sell off that property. We need to develop a policy on how we're going to dispose of county property. You cannot talk about that in executive session. But it happens, ladies and gentlemen. When a journalist or a citizen or somebody comes and asks a question about it, the answer you're given is, well, we're in executive session talking about real estate. The law doesn't say you can go in executive session to talk about real estate. It says you can go in to negotiate transactions for sale and lease of property. It's that narrow. Personnel. If any of the exceptions make good sense, this one probably makes the most sense. Let me give you an example. Let's say, for instance, that somebody in county offices is having a serious health issue and they can't do their job anymore. Maybe the health issue is potentially very embarrassing to them and to their family. And county government wants to be compassionate. But they also have a policy that requires you to be at work every day. And so county officials want to discuss how they should handle that situation without exposing that person's private, personal information. I don't think anybody in the room would think that that would be an inappropriate thing to do. Protect that person. Don't embarrass them. Don't inflict their children. Protect that person. I think community could embrace that. But you know what? Dadgummit, why don't you tell people that's what you're doing? You know? You don't have to give the name. Just say, look, we've got a very sensitive situation with an employee. It could be potentially embarrassing. And because of that, we're going to talk about this thing in executive session. The more information you give, the less suspicious people become. But I'm going to tell you something else. You may also have another situation with a county employee where they have gotten their hand up in the cookie jar. I want you to talk about that in public because I want to know. And there is no requirement in state law that prohibits you from telling the public what's going on and completely vetting a personnel issue in public if it's appropriate and you choose to do so. And then there's this whole thing about pending litigation. Stefan Ritter, some of you may know. Stefan is the assistant in Sam Olin's office that has been tasked with mediating open government issues. And a couple of years ago at Georgia Press Association headquarters in Atlanta, Stefan said that pending litigation must involve at least one piece of paper. Now, here's what Stefan meant by that. Government just can't say, oh, somebody might sue us. Or they can't just say, oh, he said he's going to sue us. That's not a trigger. What is a trigger is somebody filed a lawsuit. Or you have a letter of intent. Or the discovery has been ordered. A piece of paper. Something that indicates that there is a real fear or an actual need for strategy in legal proceedings. Some of that might make sense, you know. You don't want to tip the hand of the other party. Somebody's suing the county. Legal strategy. But I'm going to tell you a true story. Good friend of mine is a BOC chairman. A guy I would trust my life with. A good guy, wears a white hat. And he's elected to office. He tells me things, I tell him things. And I'm not saying he never makes mistakes and that he always gets it right, because if you're in here and you've never made a mistake, I'd love to meet you. But he told me about a meeting that he was a part of several years ago when he was not a BOC chairman, but when he was the mayor of a city in Georgia. And the city attorney had a training session on open government. I cannot tell you the number of times that I've had government officials tell me, hey, we've had training. We've been to the Carl Vinson Institute. We had Georgia Municipal Association training. We know all about this open government business. We've been trained. Well, let me tell you about some government training. The city attorney, who at one time represented 6 municipalities in the state of Georgia, his training was this. Guys, imagine that, a city in Georgia with an all-male council. His training was, guys, you can talk about anything you want to in private, as long as I'm in the room. First of all, that's not private. And secondly, that's not what the law says. The lawyer does not trigger the executive session. The pending litigation triggers the executive session. So just because a lawyer is present doesn't mean that they can do your business behind closed doors. The executive session privilege for litigation is for the purpose of discussing legal strategy, not for the purpose of concealing the people's business. And whether the lawyer is or is not present is immaterial. I hope there aren't any lawyers in the room, but I'll tell you my favorite lawyer joke since Holly's not back yet. Holly's a lawyer. Y'all know what you call 100 dead lawyers?
A good start.
A really good start. Actually, I have a lot of dear friends that are lawyers. Holly happens to be one of them. So understand that while there are those 3 exceptions to the Georgia Open Meetings Act, let me tell you what stands as the foundation of every provision in both the Open Meetings and the Open Records Act. Man, I bet I'm playing havoc with that camera. What stands as the very foundation of all of our Sunshine Law. By the way, there's nothing legally that's called the Sunshine Law. That's just an expression that we use to refer to the Open Meetings Act, Open Records Act. At the foundation of our Sunshine Law is this caveat. All of these exceptions shall be interpreted narrowly. So I would suggest to every county commissioner, every city council member, every board of education member, and dadgummit, every government lawyer, that it is incumbent upon you to accept the single most narrow interpretation of every single exception in the Open Meetings and the Open Records Act. Here is the problem with Georgia Municipal Association training on open government. Here's the problem with Carl Vinson Institute training on open government. They train you how not to break the law. That's not good enough. I raised my son to be a responsible citizen. I raised my son to be a good human being. I raised my son to have high moral character. And I suspect all of you did the same thing with your children. How much time did you spend raising them how not to break the law? You see, it's only in government that we think that that's adequate training. It's only in government that we think that that's the right approach to take to these issues. I I don't want you, as my elected representative, I don't want you to just merely not break the law. When I ask what goes on behind closed doors in an executive session, guess what? If you're elected to office, and I say these things not just to those people that are elected to office, but just so community understands these principles, you can tell me if you want to. A government reporter of mine a few years ago went to a Board of Education. I told this story earlier today at another event that I was doing. I don't mind me telling the same stories over and over again. I just like when you act like it's the first time you've ever heard it. And after the meeting, and they had an executive session that lasted between 2 and 3 hours, she asked the chairman of the Board of Education what they talked about in the meeting. And she said, I'm not allowed to tell you. My reporter said, why aren't you allowed to tell me? And the chairman said, I could get in trouble. My reporter, acting naive, or maybe she was naive, said, in trouble with who? And the chairman said, with the law. I am legally bound to secrecy. Now, even though I'm not a lawyer, I'm going to give y'all a legal opinion about that statement. My considered legal opinion is hogwash. My friend David Hudson said last year, in a very bold, again, public statement and legal opinion that had newspaper types just whirling last year, and a lot of government officials' heads were spinning too when he said it, that there is absolutely no code of ethics, no local ordinance, no signed piece of paper of confidentiality, no state law that can circumvent any citizen's First Amendment rights. Other than trade secrets, which are not protected under the Open Meetings and Open Records Act, other than divulging personal private information, or other than an issue involving national security, a public official ought to be free to tell you any daggum thing they want to. So maybe they go into executive session, and maybe they're in there for 2 hours. And maybe you want to know what they talked about, and they say, we're not going to tell you. And you talk to one of them, and one of them says no. And you talk to another one, and the other one says no. And you talk to the third one, and the third one says no. My advice to citizens is to keep asking. You know what I have found about county commissions and boards of education and city councils and authorities and commissions? This will surprise y'all, I know. Especially those of you that are elected and serve us. I know this will surprise you, but I have found sometimes they don't get along. Anybody ever sat on the board of deacons in your church? Listen, y'all, there ain't no fight like a church fight. Sometimes somebody come out on the wrong end of a vote. sometimes somebody felt like they weren't listened to or that they were disrespected by their fellow board of council members. Talk to them. Build a relationship with them. Now, I guarantee you, if you pony up to them and say, "Now, sugar, they can't do nothing. You just tell me how to tell them." They're going to think you're lying. So don't talk to them at the moment. You share good information with them. And you let them know in a positive and vibrant way that they have rights. They have First Amendment rights. That government cannot tell them what they can and cannot say. And any code of ethics that would take away your First Amendment rights is not worth the paper it's written on. If they want to tell you what piece of land the county is looking at, they can. If they want to tell you how much money the county is going to pay for it, they can. I'm not telling you they always should, but they can. If they want to tell you why the school secretary was fired, they can. And you know what? They probably should on that one. Do you know that governments fire people all the time and nobody ever gets to know why? And sometimes they fire people without good cause. Y'all hold them accountable. And when you find that one member of that board or that commission or that authority or that committee that'll talk, wrap your arms around them, love on them, and let them know that they're doing the right thing. Because all of that business is our business. All of those things that they're doing are our things. They're things that systemically belong to us. Do y'all know who that school secretary that got fired worked for? She worked for you. She did not work for the principal. She did not work for the school system. And she sure did not work for the Board of Education. As a matter of fact, you know who the Board of Education works for? For you. I am not content with government merely doing the bare minimum to comply with the letter of the Open Meetings and Open Records Act. Rather, I want it to be understood in a mutually respectful way that what's yours is mine and what's mine is yours. Now, let me tell you one other thing about government. They are us and we are them. We have met the government and the government is us. So that those records that government have in their filing cabinets belong to them and they belong to me. What is the right thing to do? What do you want to do with that envelope?
The right thing to do is give you your envelope.
If you can find it.
I was making sure he didn't see it.
Now, I want to know, don't you tell everybody, why did you give me this back?
Because the envelope, inside this envelope is a message that said it belongs to Jim Zachary. And because it belongs to Jim Zachary, I'm giving this piece of paper back to him. Thank you, sir.
Now, I want to talk a little bit about the way this relationship ought to work. There are very, very few areas where Holly and I disagree on things. This may be one of them where we do, and y'all can ask her about it when she comes back for Q&A. I think that your first open records request, and Holly's going to talk more about records than me, ought to be just like that. Hey, can I have that? Holly's going to tell you, write it down, put it in paper. Now, I'm going to tell you why Holly's going to tell you to write it down and put it on paper. because Holly's a lawyer. And Holly is looking at it from a legal remedy point of view. I'm looking at it from an ownership point of view. I don't know another way to say this, but let's try to learn to play nice with others. So, you walk into the county clerk's office. Actually, you don't walk in. You march in. Where are those minutes? I want those minutes pursuant to the Georgia Open Records Act. I want those minutes post haste, or I'm calling a lawyer. What you mean? How y'all gonna feel if you're Bill? I'm gonna tell you, your back's gonna be bristly.
Yep.
Hair's gonna be standing up on the back of your neck. And you may know that you have to give me those minutes, but you ain't gonna be in no hurry. My grandma used to say, ugly is as ugly does.
Yeah.
Be nice to folks. Treat folks with respect. Here's why I think your first open government request, your open records request ought to look like. Hey, Bill, you got those minutes? Can I have them? You know what's crazy? A lot of times when you simply go to a clerk or a custodian, and it's no big deal, you just kind of casual and you say, hey, by the way, have you got those minutes from last night? More often than not, they turn around and grab them and say, oh, here they are. But instead, we want to march and we want to bark and we want to demand and we want to command. Just ask. My recommendation to news reporters and to the public is always this. Make your first request for information as casual as humanly possible and as non-threatening as humanly possible. Because when you ask for some minutes, I'm just using minutes, it doesn't matter what it is. But when you ask for minutes, all you're doing is asking for the paper that you bought. I mean, all you're doing is asking for something that belongs to you. So if you're asking somebody to give you something that belongs to you, why should you act like they're not going to give it to you? Act with the assumption that it's yours. And I don't mean demanding, hey, that's mine, give it to me. I mean, if something belongs to me, it ought to be just as simple as, hey, I left my paper, could you grab that for me? I mean, it ought to be that casual, because we're not asking for anything extraordinary when we ask for an open record. And when it comes to executive sessions, you know, we can be, again, a bull in the china shop and say, I demand that you tell me, or we can say, hey, Bill, what y'all doing back there? I'll tell you, had a city councilman in Stockbridge, Georgia. Went up to him. Y'all know anything about the drama in Stockbridge? Man, I'm telling you what, if it happens in Clayton or Henry County. So, I had a city councilman in Stockbridge one time. I could tell he was frustrated with his council members, with his fellow council members. And he didn't really like the direction things were going on, so I thought, man, they keep going back there, spending hours in executive session. They're gobbling up property right and left. Nobody knows what they're up to. There's this crazy company that swooped in here from outside. Nobody knows who they are, and they can't find their offices, can't find anything about them on the internet. And there's some shenanigans going on, and nobody council talked to me, the mayor won't talk to me. So I could see the frustration in this one city councilman. And he was a great man. He had done a whole lot to advocate for good, positive things in the community, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful individual. As a matter of fact, the all-white city council was getting ready to close the historic black school in the community that just had a great history and turn it into out of storage or something like that. And he was the only black man on the city council, and in his very quiet, very respectful way, he just stood up to them and said, y'all can't do this, this is legacy, and in addition to that, these kids are getting a great education, they're performing better than your highfalutin, high-dollar schools. We need to keep this school open, and they kept it open. Just a man that I respected because of his advocacy, but he did it in a non-threatening kind of way. And so I could tell that there's some shenanigans going on, but it was all going on in executive session. You know what was going on? My reporters were getting frustrated. So I thought, you know what? I bet he'll talk. He's a man of integrity. Might have been the only one. It just seemed like he was as honest as the day was long, and I thought he'll talk. So I went up to him after a meeting, and I said, hey, could we get coffee or have lunch or something? I'll Jim anytime. He said, just anytime. So we walked out in the parking lot, and we just started talking and chatting. And I said, well, let me ask you something. I know something's going on. I know there's monkey business going on instead of the people's business when y'all close those doors. I know stuff's going on. Would you be willing to talk to me? He said, well, Jim, there's a lot of things I could tell you, but you wouldn't believe a word of it. As good as he was, as honest as he was, my friend, and I still count him that, I've not seen him in a few years, was scared to death to see me because he'd been intimidated. He'd been told all the bad things that were going to happen to him. He'd been warned. He wasn't one of the good old boys. He'd been warned. He'd been told what the repercussions would be if he ever talked about what was going on. He'd been told he had signed a piece of paper, and he'd even been told that he could go to jail. Now, I believe this man because I knew him, and he had integrity. I know sometimes people lie, and they tell you things that I don't think this man lied to me. He said, Jim, I got a family to take care of, and I'm a working man, and I can't go to jail on this matter of principle. And he said, I hate myself for saying that. I'm going to be honest with you, I backed off. Because I believed him. And I think here was a man that had an immense amount of integrity and wanted to do the right thing, but he'd been told the wrong thing. Hopefully we can build a culture of openness where people know that that kind of fear and intimidation has no place in Georgia government. And that we make officials realize, and we make government realize, and someday, somehow, some way, we make the General Assembly realize that we're the stakeholders. We're the investors. And if you don't buy any of that, we are the funders of government. We have the financial investment to be able to ask for our pieces of paper and for our business that is going on behind closed doors. Does anybody really not believe that there's corruption in government? Please don't be naive. But I'm not telling you that everybody is corrupt. There are good officials out there. There are good officials who believe in doing the right things. There are officials that are committed to open government. There are officials that are committed to transparency. There are officials that are committed to representative form of government, but they have been hamstrung and led and deceived and deluded by counsel and by training that tells them things that are not absolutely true. Let's lessen the executive sessions. If you're here and you work for county government or you're elected to office or city government, at the very, very least, please take a really hard look at your executive sessions and ask yourself this question. Always ask yourself this question, and only this question. Is it absolutely necessary? The wrong question is, can we? Now listen, this is important. When it comes to closing a meeting, the question should never, ever, 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 ever be, can we? That's the wrong question. The right question is, do we have to? And if you can't find a have to, then leave it open. If you can't find a have to for real estate, leave it open. If you can't have a have to for litigation, leave it open. If you don't have a have to for personnel, leave it open. If anybody is a records custodian, the right question when somebody requests any kind of documentation, the right question is never and should never be, do I have to provide it? The only question should be, is there any reason why I shouldn't? The presumption in Georgia, by law, the presumption by code is a presumption of openness. Now, I don't know if y'all know that or not, but read the Georgia Open Records and Open Meetings Act, and you will find the act begins by telling us that the General Assembly says that the presumption is always a presumption of openness. So you add that to the caveat that all of the exceptions to the act are to be narrowly interpreted. And a reasonable person reading the law would say that means that government should hardly ever be closed. So write that down, mentally at least. If in fact Georgia says that the presumption should be toward openness, and if it says every exception should be narrowly interpreted, that necessarily means that government should always be more open than it is closed. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, who may be your favorite president or your least favorite president, depending on who you are, said that the very word secrecy is repugnant in democracy. Why would our government need, want, or have any secrets about anything whatsoever? I like what Sandra Day O'Connor said when she said that a fundamental premise of American democratic theory is that government exists to serve the people. We've come a long way from what it means to have a citizen government, but that is our form of government. Y'all know that Georgia has some of the highest paid elected officials in the United States. Where did we get to this place that we have a professional form of government? As a matter of fact, now, in addition to the fact that we highly pay our elected officials, in addition to that fact, we now hire professional staff that operate the day-to-day operations of government for us. Now, I'm not saying all this has to change or needs to change or will change, but I just want you to think of how the very theory and the concept of government has changed. Can you imagine Jefferson? Can you imagine Washington? Can you imagine Adams ever envisioning an America where government is holding secrets? Can you imagine them ever envisioning an America where government is our single largest employer? We are a self-governed people. And so, when we ask for documents or we ask for meeting records, we are asking ourselves to give us what belongs to each of us all the time. One of the things that we did not talk about with respect to meetings, and I'll go over a little bit about meetings and just a brief few things about records. And then we can just kind of go ahead and start opening it up for some discussions and questions. But the law requires that all meetings be public noticed. I don't know when we started using public notice as a verb, but somehow we started doing that a few years ago. Public noticing a meeting basically means that any resident can know when government is going to get together and discuss the people's business. And while the public notice requirements in Georgia are okay, they're not that great. There is not a required publication of public notice in the legal organ of the newspaper. The government just has to give it to them. And there's not a required location where the public notice has to be. It just has to be in a conspicuous location. I don't know what that means. A meeting needs to be noticed at a minimum of 3 business days, but when do you start counting the day? Here's my advice to government. Give people as much notice as you possibly can. Let them know as long as you can. As a matter of fact, how about this as a rule of thumb? Let the general public know at the exact same time that every member of the elected body knows. So don't let a city councilman or a county commissioner know that there's going to be a meeting before the public knows. Here's an even better one. Let the general public know as soon as city or county or school staff knows. Because we live in an instant information society. Now that's not always great for me because I'm in the newspaper business. But I'm going to tell you, you can find out anything, anytime, anywhere. And I don't know that there's a government in Georgia now that doesn't have either a website or a Facebook or a Twitter. I'm not saying that's the only place you ought to notice it, but you ought to at least notice it there. And do it in a way that's just as open as humanly possible. Minutes and summaries of meetings have got to be made available in a reasonable period of time. And the minutes for the previous meeting have got to be made available at least by the convening of the next meeting so that those minutes can be approved and ratified. And some people say, you know, that maybe that's unreasonable. They got 30 days to ostensibly get their minutes together. My advice to government is just as soon as you get them done, make them available. Georgia does not protect works in progress. Some states protect works in progress. What that means is that, like, if there's a draft of the minutes, that's your draft. Belongs to you. You should have access to it. Budget drafts. Now, I will tell you, this is one that really gets under the skin of government sometimes. You know, every year when they start having all those budget meetings, and you go in and say, I want the drafts that the commissioners are working off of, and they'll say, oh, they're not done yet. Doesn't matter. It's on your paper, it was done on your copy, or it's your ink, and it's your business, and it's your money they're talking about. Drafts are not protected. Works in progress are not protected in Georgia. When those drafts are created, they're yours. My advice to government is, if there's nothing to hide, don't hide. And information is power, and it's all public information. Now, again, y'all's local government may be doing a great job, but I'm just going to tell you, it's not being done in great ways throughout the state. It needs to be done better. Government has websites now that are amazing technological, but they're not populated as well as they need to be. We held an open government symposium in Valdosta, I don't know, about a month ago, and government has rolled out one of the most comprehensive local government websites. They just keep populating with more and more and more information. A lot of the people that complained about government have stopped complaining because they've got more access to more information than they've ever had before. Used to, what we used to have to put in filing cabinets and search and search and search and locate. Now it's just accessible and ready and easy to get. So again, the advice to government is just, as drafts become available, just make them available. Throw them up on your website. It's not going to hurt anything. And look, if somebody confuses a draft with the final document, that's okay, because citizens are always confused. Provide as much information as possible, and here's the other thing that maybe will help government officials. When citizens feel like you're being as accommodating as you could possibly be and as open as you could possibly be, they support you. They believe in you. They stand by you, and they vote for you. Here's the thing that's always surprised me about open government. I have hardly ever, no, I have never, in all the years of doing this, ever heard anybody pledge during a campaign that they were going to have more executive sessions. I've never heard anybody pledge in a campaign that they were going to hide more government documents. You know what everybody promises when they're running for office? I want to be transparent. Here's their pledge. I have an open door policy. What's a closed door policy? Open government's kind of like the weather. Everybody talks about it, but nobody does anything about it. If you be as open as your pledge and stay consistently married to that, then people will support you even when you get it wrong. The other big advice to government is take it on the chin when you get it wrong. When you mess up, admit to it. Do y'all know, and please don't make this a political thing, but do y'all know that we would remember and think differently about Bill Clinton forever if he'd ever just looked square in the camera and said, yeah, I did it. You know, it would have changed everything for everybody so far as the way they perceive that whole thing. The more government just takes it on the chin and admits it, the more that it's embraced. Okay, so we talked quite a bit about open meetings. We talked a little bit about open records. As we sort of go around the room and we talk about these kinds of things, again, what I caution you to do is focus in on whatever your questions are that are relative to transparency and openness in government, not what government has done to you. And Holly and I are very, very careful that we don't get a lot involved in local issues, basically because it's not our bailiwick. The other thing that we tell you, and even when Holly is here, is that the advice that we give you is not legal advice in the sense of not advice that you're going to go to court with. And if you need representation, you know, Holly does run a law firm, and we have a lot, we know some lawyers try to get people to do things pro bono is sometimes impossible. But we do our best to talk about best practices and to tell you what we understand the law to say. But we're not going to be able to necessarily litigate your case in an open government symposium. Okay, so anybody that has a question or a shared experience, or this is the first one I saw. Let me get this over. I'll walk these around so we can hear.
Question regarding, you mentioned executive sessions regarding personnel issues, and you made a statement about, obviously it involves personally embarrassing somebody to keep that closed. But you said you would open it if it were involving somebody who, say, is embezzling proceedings in the government. Where would you draw the line? Let's say if an employee is accused of that but hasn't been proven, where do you draw that line?
First of all, there are no absolute answers. Secondly, I would draw the line with respect to the public trust. And if something is egregious enough to fire someone, that involves, in my judgment, the public trust. If it's not egregious enough to fire someone, I will tell you this. Here's an interesting thing about personnel law that most people don't realize. Did y'all know that you cannot receive evidence against somebody in executive session? So in the case that you're talking about, let's say someone's accused of embezzlement, and they want to have a hearing, and they want to bring people in and say, hey, I saw him. I said him because everybody always thinks that it's a woman working in an office. I saw him reach down and put some money and put a tin spot in his pocket. That's evidence. That's the receipt of evidence. That's the hearing of witnesses, and that's not allowed in executive session. So, even a lot of the kind of things that go on in executive session, I think would fall into the area of receiving evidence, and it's done anyway, but it's cloaked under personnel. You cannot discuss, by the way, personnel policy in executive session. So that, let's say, for instance, the county is looking at the end of the year budget, and they've got, $5,000 they didn't expect to have, and they want to talk about maybe a way that they could divvy that up among certain employees that have done a really good job and give them a bonus at the end of the year, but they don't have enough to give to everybody, so they don't want to talk about it in public. They just want to go to executive session. They're going to call it personnel, and they're going to figure out how they can divide this money. You can't do that. You can't make those decisions, nor can you even have those discussions in executive session, because it is not a personnel issue. A good friend of mine has a policy, who's also a VOC chairman, about personnel in executive session. His policy is called the proper noun policy. It's got to involve a name. And if he doesn't hear Jane Doe, John Smith, if there's not a name that involves one person with one issue, he won't go back. It's a hard line to draw. But I think that, you've got to think, what, not just as what the public right to know or the public need to know, but what's in the public's best interest. Now, let me do.
Could you just talk to your funding sources?
For the First Amendment Foundation and the Transparency Project, first of all, the Transparency Project of Georgia is basically Jim Zachary and Kelsey Cochran, a colleague of mine. And everything that we do is free. And every expense that we have comes out of my pocket. Because this is about principle, not about money. The Georgia First Amendment Foundation, that I'm also a part of with Holly, does have some modest private funding, but receives no public funds. And those monies largely are used for the printing of publications and the handouts that you will get if Holly gets back. There's no public funding.
Will you discuss best practices for public comments and then what the law requires?
The question was about public commenting and what the law requires with respect to public comments. Most of you are familiar with public commenting sessions at your county commissions, board of education, et cetera, et cetera. The revision in April of 2012 did include a caveat about public commenting, but it did not really regulate it. There is no requirement of local officials to respond. They just have to listen. I find that sometimes a little bit frustrating, but basically here's what can happen. They can put public comments at the first of a meeting, or they can put it at the end of a meeting, or they can put it at the beginning of the meeting. They can allow you to talk for a minute, or they can allow you to talk till the cows come home. They can respond to you, or they cannot. All they have to do is have something on their agenda that says public comments, and they can require you to sign up, or they can require you to show up. Now, the question was about best practice. I'm going to give you absolute best practice, and then I'm going to tell you what never happens. Hampton, Georgia. Anybody been to Hampton, Georgia? Gotta love you some Hampton. So, a newly elected mayor in Hampton a few years ago, he's not in office anymore, had never been elected to office before, and had never really listened to anybody tell him, boy, this is how you do it. He just decided that he was elected to represent people, and he was people, and he was gonna talk to people like people talk to people. Wouldn't that be great? So the first city council meeting that I went to, they were discussing traffic calming devices. Does anybody know what a traffic calming device is? Where I come from, we call them speed bumps. But when they introduced the agenda item, traffic calming devices, I was thinking mood music, soft lighting, seascape. And so the mayor got to that agenda item and he said, and they had a packed house, every city council meeting had a packed house. Wouldn't that be great? And so he said, well, we're supposed to talk about these traffic calming devices. And he asked the city manager for, to explain the agenda item, and he gets up and he starts making his deep voice formal presentation about the need for traffic calming devices in the city. And the mayor said, no. He said, we don't need all that. You people, y'all gonna be the one driving over these speed bumps. How do you feel about it? This person stood up and spoke. Sit down. This person stood up and spoke. Sit down. This person stood up and spoke. Sit down. This person stood up, spoke. Sit down. This person stood up, spoke. Sit down. Some people wanted them. Some people didn't. Some people were tired of the kids running through Main Street at 90 miles an hour. Some folks said that they didn't want to have to get their tires realigned on their car. Let me tell you what never, ever happened in that 45-minute discussion about traffic calming devices in the city of Hampton. What never happened? It never got out of control. It never got unruly. Nobody ever poked anybody, took a poke at anybody, thought about poking anybody. Nobody shouted, screamed, or yelled. Nobody took anybody out to the barnyard. It was civil. People agreed to agreeably disagree, and they came up with a compromise plan that limited the number of traffic calming devices. That is public commenting the way it ought to work, and that's government the way that it ought to work. Because who are they putting the traffic calming devices in for? Not for government. Those are the residents. Now, I will tell you 2 words about that with respect to you and your local government. Good luck. Because they will do it. And here's what they'll say. It'd get out of hand. Our meetings would last for 6 hours. People would get mad, hot under the collar. We take too much heat. Never work here. Couldn't do it. He did. It did. It worked. And they made good decisions as the result of it. There's nothing in the law to require anybody to do anything like that. He's just a good guy doing a good thing in a good way. That's best practice. Now, short of that, what I will tell you is that this is going to sound disrespectful. I apologize ahead of time, which means I probably shouldn't say it. But the one thing I wish that elected officials would learn to do during public comment is not roll their daggone eyes. That is the most disrespectful thing that I can imagine. And if you were at home and you told your middle schooler to do something or ask them a question and they rolled their eyes at you, you'd probably tan their backside. But that happens, and I've seen it happen over and over and over and over again, and it's just disrespectful. There are very, very few jurisdictions that I'm aware of in Georgia that will respond back during public comment. Usually they will not even answer questions. I do not personally, there's nothing legally wrong here, but I don't personally like the model where you require people to sign up ahead of time. I know some jurisdictions, you even have to provide a synopsis of what you're going to say. Are you serious? Are we in 3rd grade? That is overreach. And I believe that if you're going to have this public commenting period, first of all, it would be best to have it at the beginning of the meeting, not the end, because if somebody's looked at an agenda item and they want to talk about something government's going to discuss, let's say they're going to talk about rezoning your neighborhood. And you have something to say about that, and the public hearing has already happened, and you want to talk about it before they take the vote, why put it at the end of the meeting after the vote's already been taken? They're not going to undo what they just did because you got up and spoke at public comment. So I'm suggesting it's best practice to put it at the front end of the meeting. I know maybe 2 or 3 cities that do that. And it's also best practice to allow people to simply stand up at the meeting and not have to pre-register to speak at public comment. And you can have a defined period. You know, you can. It's not unreasonable to give people 5 minutes or something. But here's the other practice that's really strange that happens in cities and counties. Y'all watch this. So a citizen wants to complain about trash pickup, and they're given 2 minutes during public comment. And I don't know if any of y'all have this jurisdiction, but they have this time clock. And they start the time clock. It's click, 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 click. Some of them even, you hear the clicking sound going. Because that citizen's talking about trash pickup. But you let somebody wants to come talk to city council about doing a donut sale in order to benefit the band that's going to go play at the Rodents Parade, and they won't turn that clock on, and they'll cut up there and drone on and on and on and on and on, and nobody will say a word or think a thing. And I'm just saying it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander. I don't want to cut off the donut folks or you know, the band folks or anything like that, but I don't want to cut off citizens that have legitimate concerns about public policy that affects their community. So having some kind of time frame is reasonable. You don't want somebody to kind of filibuster around, I wouldn't think. But putting them before the meeting is better than at the end of the meeting. And allowing people to show up and speak up rather than pre-register seems to be more citizen-friendly, if that makes sense. Do you have thoughts about it?
My concern with it being at the beginning of the meeting is when the item comes up on the agenda, you can't respond to what's being said. So that's why, and they don't allow you that opportunity when they discuss something.
Right. Now, there are, yeah, that's why I love the Hampton model. There are very few cities that have experimented with doing all of their business at the beginning of a meeting, so far as all their discussions. Then they have public commenting, and then they do votes. I know one city that did that. They did it for about 6 months, and then they abandoned the practice. I think it was Marlboro. But I've never really seen anybody consistently do anything like that. Okay, let's way back here.
I've done several open records requests, and generally I will get a letter back from the lawyer that says, we're not in possession of responsive documents. That happens quite often.
Okay, do y'all know, that kind of steals my thunder on this question, and I usually do this when Holly's around, but it doesn't happen often. So, do y'all know what the single most common response is to an open records request in Georgia? We have no records responsive to your request. We have no records responsive to your request. Here's what that means. This is government speak, and here's the interpretation of that government speak, just to help you out a little bit with the language barrier. What that means is, you did not ask us in exactly the way that we wanted you to ask us, and because you didn't ask us the way that we wanted you to ask us, we really didn't want to give you the record anyway, so you can go back home and figure out the right way to ask the question and give it another shot. If you get a little bit closer, we might give it to you, but you better be right this time. Here's the advice to government. Why? It's their piece of paper anyway. Why? Why? If you know what they're after, dadgummit, just give it to them. It's not a game. Just give it to them. They're going to get it eventually anyway. Even if it ends up in court, they're going to get it anyway. Dadgummit, just give it to them. It's not a game. Just give it to them. They're going to get it. Just give it to them. Now, Let me do say this though. And I don't want to offend anybody with this, but needle in the haystack requests are a waste of everybody's time. And a lot of times, what I've seen happen is that people just want to irritate their government. Well, just think about this. Government is us, we are government, you're irritating yourself. Don't request anything you don't have a reason to give. Don't ask for anything that you're not going to use. It's just like y'all clapped when I said to government, give it to them, it's not a game. Well, it's not a game when you ask for it either. It's not about the war. It's not about the battle. It's not about winning. It's about whatever it was that you wanted. It's about the document itself. So don't make it about, oh, I'm going to ask for this and see if they give me that. You know what I'm saying? Because what you do is you exasperate the situation, you create an adversarial relationship, and you may put cost on government, and here's what I don't get. I know of a guy that made, and I may have the number wrong, $7,000 worth of open records requests. Here's my problem with that. He's charging himself. Not in addition to the fact that he's charging himself, he's charging me, and he's charging you, and he's charging you, and he's charging you. I don't think he wanted anything in that records request. He just wanted to make government do it. And he's paying the bill because he's a citizen. It just doesn't make any sense, either from government side or from the resident side, to make this thing a battleground. Ask for what you want, ask for what you need, and then expect to get it. But, you know, here's the other thing that everybody should know. The Open Records Act specifically says government cannot be asked to produce a document that doesn't exist. I know that sounds stupid, right? But here's what that means. You have got to realize that not everything that you might want to know exists. For instance, you might say, give me the list of every piece of property that government has bought over the past 25 years. My guess is there's no piece of paper in county offices that has all of that on one piece of paper. My guess is that list doesn't exist. So government can't be asked to produce that list because it doesn't exist. You see what I'm saying? Now, there may be another way to ask that question. You may say, give me every warranty deed that government owns. You know, I don't know, always the best way, the right way to ask the question, but make the request as narrow as you possibly can, not broad. Broad requests are more difficult to satisfy. Narrow requests identify what it is that you're after and what it is that you want. And here's the other thing. My good friend Paige Dukes, who is a county clerk in Lowndes County, tells me all the time about people that make these voluminous open records requests. And she said, Jim, usually when people make those requests, all they want is a piece of information that they can get for free just by calling me and saying, hey, Paige, when was the last time that ordinance 10-20-1304 was changed? And I might be able to tell them because we did it last week. A lot of times people might call and say, I need a copy of, the county's leash law. And she could say over the telephone, well, do you actually need to print a copy or do you just need me to tell you what it says? See, a lot of times it's just about talking to people and communicating with people. Asking a question, you'll get the answer. Generally speaking, in my experience, we have no records responsive to your request means you didn't ask it exactly right. My advice to officials is you know what they want, give it to them. If you don't do it. Get your next. Now you got to do this. That's if I get to. It's fun. It's fun. It really is. You feel like a star. You can do Elvis.
Is it legal to charge residents to review open records if they don't get a copy of it?
No. The state has specifically addressed that in the April 2012 revision of the Open Records Act. That records inspection is what is called in the law. Records inspection cannot be charged. Basically, you can't be charged to go into your own office and look at your own things. Now, if that requires records production, that may be a different story. But records inspection cannot be charged.
First of all, thank you for being here. And I certainly have learned quite a bit, and I've also learned a lot about actually doing requests. And I have wasted my time. I've wasted county and city officials' time at times because, frankly, I didn't know what I was asking for. So I think you touched on a couple of things. Certainly be specific about what you're asking for, and just be friendly with them and say, look, I'm looking for something that will show me this. And they will say, well, this is a document that exists, and it's called this, and it's form so-and-so, and then you ask specifically for that. It saves a lot of time and effort in that. And an example is when this building and that building was being built, I read a lot about $800 chairs and $300 trash cans. So I was curious about what we were buying, and so I asked for the book of what this building was going to be about. Well, I found out it was going to cost me $265 to get this book. Well, you know, I wasn't going to pay that. I thought, well, at least look at it, right? So after a friendly conversation with the attorney, she agreed to just give me the book and said, here, just take the book. You know, and that's really, you know, from $265, I walked out there paying $2.65 for a couple extra documents. So there's ways of getting documents, but I also think that there are a certain amount of documents that are created on a daily and weekly basis that should be automatically be provided where we don't have to ask for them, and that they, with electronic media and et cetera, the websites, these documents can be instantly scanned, put online, so we don't even have to bother them. And sometimes it does become this game. And also, to talk about the fact that we have an archivist in this county, and she does require, they do require documentation of the request, because there's actually, is there not, a criminal penalty attached to denial or refusal of open records, and they want to document that.
Okay, there's a whole lot in that, and I think there's a lot of good dialogue. Number one, that is exactly the right way to do it. And that is have conversations with people, talk to them in a civil way, and that's perfect. Like, is there some place that this information exists? This is what I'm after, this is what my end game is. And a lot of times you'll find a clerk or a custodian that can say, oh, no, I get it now. I see what you want, and this is the way to go about it. Georgia is one of the few states where there are actual penalties for denying a request, and there are actual penalties for violating the Open Meetings Act. And most people know about the penalties for denying a request, but they don't know about the penalties for abusing executive session or for having a quorum without public notice. $1,500 out of your own pocket and $2,500 for subsequent acts. And the subsequent acts could have all happened at the same time. You could actually be charged for each record you deny. So that's pretty hefty. Now, I want to commend the state of Georgia, and Holly was a huge part of this law, for putting some teeth in its law. Because most states have open records and all states have open records and open meetings laws, but they have no teeth. The only remedy in most states is you get the record. That's it. There's no penalty, and so public officials almost, they know what the law says, but they almost thumb their nose at it. Yeah, okay, big deal, that's what the law says. In Georgia, the General Assembly, through some very strong advocacy, my friend David Hudson and my friend Holly Manheimer were key components of that. Sam Holmes was a part of it, and they set up committees and brought a lot of stakeholders to the table, had media representatives there. They advocated for a lot of the April 2012 revisions, and a lot of those I embraced. But they put those penalties in there, and that seemed like that was going to be a difference maker. I mean, if you are a city councilman and you know that you can have to shell out $1,500 out of your own snow outside, $1,500 out of your own pocket for doing something in executive session that you're not allowed to do, I think that should sound like, whoa, Nelly, I ain't gonna do that. You know, I think you'd get up and walk out of the meeting. $1,500. I mean, I don't know about y'all, but you know, I like $1,500. I don't really want to part with it because I was in a meeting. So that sounds great, right? Everybody think that sounds great? April 2012. Since April of 2012, y'all know how many times the penalty's been imposed?
0.
Cumming, Georgia.
Oh, 1?
Cumming, Georgia. One time because the mayor tried to throw a video camera out of the meeting. And the lady protested, and the mayor had her, I guess, escorted out. I don't know the details of the case. And Sam Owens went after that one. Now, do y'all really think for a moment that from April 2012 to April 2013 to April 2014 to February 2015, that Cumming, Georgia is the only city, the only county, the only Board of Education in the state of Georgia that violated open meetings, the Open Records Act? Heck no. So it's good that the law is there, but it doesn't matter if you don't enforce it. Now, let me tell you a little bit real quick about enforcement. If you're thinking about going to your DA, it's a waste of your time. DAs will not touch the sunshine law. They won't touch it. It's the law. They won't touch it. I can tell you why I think they won't touch it. I can tell you about the fact that they work in counties and they're not going to police the counties they work in. That's my opinion. The truth is they won't touch it. So you're left to the AG's office or litigation.
What about emails? I've done an open record request and I found where they have made decisions about changing sidewalks and all that kind of stuff via emails.
Okay. First of all, there are two things about this. The one thing is, please know this, and if you work for the government, please know this, especially if you're a public school teacher, please know this, because for me saying this as sensitively as I know how, some people have been sorely, horribly embarrassed to find out that every one of their emails on a government computer or through their government account is a public record. And it's a shame. People have been hurt. Things have happened. People sometimes write things they probably shouldn't, and it's all public record. So anybody that works for government, just be careful of those emails. Secondly, the Open Meetings Act specifically addresses electronic meetings, and deliberating business to circumvent the law electronically is a violation of the law. In fact, we just busted a county for making a decision that they did just by circulating emails. The problem is, and you've probably already found this out, is nailing. And then once you nail it, once you find it, once you get the emails, is getting anybody to take the calls up. Here has been the policy, and I'm not attacking Sam Owens in this, nor am I defending, believe me, but here's kind of basically been my experience with the Attorney General's office, because it has oversight and enforcement powers with respect to open meetings and Open Records Act. And that is, number one, they want high-profile cases. Number two, and you just interpret that any way you want to. Number two, they want winnable cases. And number three, it is their position that their mediation solves most issues. So their position is the reason they've not prosecuted more cases is because when they pick up the telephone and call a government and say, give them the record, they give them the record, therefore there's no case. I guess that question is, does the action match the rhetoric? Did somebody else over here have something? Yeah, back. We got two. I'm gonna get, she's not yet, and then we'll come back to you.
First question is, did you bring any of David Hudson's business cards? 'Cause since he's the authority. And my last thing is something you alluded to earlier. My frustration of being an elected official only for a year is this. All our training is done by government. So it's government teaching you how to be an elected official, and I have said in GMA meetings, apologize if anybody's here from GMA, but some of it is very much from the government standpoint, could almost be considered insulting to a citizen if they're talking about taxation. What kind of resource can we have other than them for how we're supposed to handle these sort of things?
First of all, I could just hug you to death, because what you're saying is what I'm hearing over and over again from a lot of my girls, ladies, everybody, you little one. What I'm hearing from a lot of my friends in government is exactly what you're saying, that they feel the exact same kind of thing. They want to just do the right thing, and they're citizens first, and they work for government second. And as a matter of fact, I'm actually working on a relationship between me and the County Clerks Association for us to bring our training to the County Clerks Association instead of the Carl Vinson or GMA type training. I think you hit the nail on the head, and not so nice to say that is the foxes in charge of the hen house. All of the government training, like I said earlier, is designed to keep government out of court, to keep them from breaking the law. That doesn't mean that they are fulfilling the spirit of the law and doing exactly what was intended by the General Assembly and its open meetings and open records act. Hull and Barrett is David Hudson's law firm, by the way. It's in Augusta. And how can I say this without offending my friend David? He represents the Georgia Press Association, and his private counsel is not cheap. So hopefully that doesn't offend my friend David. Holly, however, all the services through our transparency project and her legal advice through, not legal advice in the sense of, she's not going to file a brief for you, but all of it is available pro bono. All the work that we do, all the advocacy that we do, and the questions that we answer are free, and you can get on the firstamendmentfoundation.org, and we even have a Q&A on there where y'all can send us questions by going to the First Amendment Foundation, and Holly will respond to you in a few days. If it's more immediate, a lot of times if you'll put something in the subject line that it's an immediate request, it's something you need to know right now, Holly will be really responsive to that. And I'll give you a cell phone. I mean, you can call us, and that's true to anybody. But, one of the things that I get so frustrated about in the workplace and in every place is people talking about being too busy. I know a lot of people that do a lot of things and a lot of high-profile jobs and a lot of blue-collar jobs. To be honest with you, I don't know hardly anybody that is too busy and doesn't have enough time to talk to somebody for a minute or two. So y'all do have that resource, and you can always contact us. And the literature, all the literature, the PowerPoints and everything that we use, we have available for free on the websites. Also, if y'all want to go to gapress.org, the Georgia Press website has got free literature on it. First Amendment Foundation.org has, actually it's gfaf.org, or you can search Georgia First Amendment Foundation. So Georgia First Amendment Foundation, gfaf.org, and get all the free information that we have available on that site. And she may have got over there and it was snowing bad in Atlanta, and so I'll just encourage y'all, the booklets are available on PDFs that you can directly download off of that site. And then all the material that's on the other site, and this is my site, it's transparencyprojectofgeorgia.com. That's a long one. Transparency Project of Georgia, not Georgia Transparency Project, the Transparency Project of Georgia.com. There you will have all kinds of links and resources, everything on my site. I promise you, everything, there is nothing on my site that you can plagiarize. I hereby, definitely, and forever give you permission to reprint, recraft, put your name on anything that is written on my website. If you work for a newspaper and you want to take the editorials, the free editorials on there and put your name on it, go ahead. I'm serious as a heart attack. Anything on there you can have. If you want to print it out and put it in your brochure for the Tea Party, and you want to have it in your monthly newsletter, and you want to put your own name on it, I don't care. It's free, it's there, it's available to you. You cannot plagiarize me. You have Jim Zachary's permission forever. And everything on there is original. I wrote it, so you can have it. And I don't care if you claim it for your own.
I have a comment about our records department. There are actually, when people think of records of county commissioner government, they think of just the papers that the county commissioners get. And I have actually read records for about 80 years ago. It's, what they don't understand is there's all the other records, the Superior Court, the probate records. All those are considered, and we have two wonderful ladies that do this job, and they are very cooperative. If, like you said, you just have to be specific, and don't forget that the records were handwritten up until about the 1920s when we had typewriters.
I used to pick up years and years ago when I was a kid, at 6 years old, my first newspaper job. We had a police department that would go by and get police records, because y'all love to read police records in the newspaper. And the officers would come in at the end of the day, every day, had this big ledger, this book, it's about this big, and they'd handwrite their incident reports. We had to go up there, sit down at the desk, turn those pages, and handwrite them all. Have y'all ever seen a cop's handwriting? Worse than a doctor. All right, we're gonna get a few more. Anybody that hasn't, I don't want to leave.
I've got, this is a twofold, this is actually twofold about closed session. Closed session. What if a public official did not want to go into closed session? Everybody else wanted to go and he didn't want to. And if they can't receive evidence in closed session, when can they receive evidence?
They can only receive evidence in public.
Okay.
That's just what the law says. They may not like it, but that's what the law says. And secondly, there's nothing to compel an official, but I have seen a city try to remove a city councilman because he would not go into executive session. Tried to remove him from office. Go figure. There should be a quorum in executive session. They are required to keep minutes in executive session. The bad thing about that is that the minutes aren't public records. I'll try to explain that to you. They have to keep minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, Holly my members in the house. They would have said great things about you. And the reason they're required to keep minutes in executive session is in the event that there should be litigation, especially litigation that would challenge the reason for the executive session, because, no, you gone? Is it snowing?
Yes,
You
it
get
was
back?
a bad idea. I should have mailed you all the material.
Be careful.
Yeah, anyway, red books, blue books, green books, I'm rewriting.
I'll tell you all the difference between the red and the blue. We'll break up here in just a minute. But in the event somebody challenges the executive session, then the courts can trigger those minutes. And they have to sign an affidavit at the end of each session to say that they only discussed the things that were legally privileged. All right, we're just going to get a few more because it sounds like y'all need to get on the road. And I know I do.
I was really hoping that somebody else would ask this
That's
question.
interesting.
What do you think of out-of-town retreats for county commission?
I'm going to tell you, it's really funny that you asked that question because I just got a visit. Apparently, I was told that, what is today? Friday? Thursday night, the Valdosta City Council apparently ripped me up one side and down another because of an editorial that challenged the fact that they took their retreat an hour and a half out of town. And all I did was I contrasted the city council's retreat with the county's retreat. That makes sense, right? So county government is what? 4 or 5 times the size of city government. If you look at size of budget, number of employees, number of citizens served. So the city of Valdosta they went to the Quail Lodge something or another. It sounded really nice on the website. I didn't know. So they went to this like little lodge, quaint old thingamajigger out in, middle of nowhere. And they spent somewhere between $6,000 and $7,000 on a retreat. And I'd written an editorial back in November before they started scheduling retreats saying, please stay at home.
Yeah.
Number one, you're going to spend your money at home. Number two, you're going to support local businesses. Number three, you're going to do the public's business in a public way. So Lowndes County government is paying attention. They kept their government retreat at home. They spent money too. City spent $6,000. Lowndes County spent $600. 4 times, 5 times the size government, spent $600. Now, personally, I think that for $600 is too much. I know, but I patted them on the back. I praise them for doing that, but think about this. We can take county employees and city employees and sit them in a government office all day, every day. How many days a week do they work? 5 days a week. And every month and every year, and they sit in those offices all day long in those uncomfortable chairs, doing business, doing budgets, planning, writing all the documents that they're going to take with them on the retreat, and the county buildings and the county offices are good enough for them. Why in the world is it not good enough for a group of county commissioners or city councilmen to be able to meet in the buildings that we already paid for? And I'm going to tell y'all, please accept my apologies. I don't have anything against y'all's county. It's a beautiful county. But dadgummit, these are some buildings. All paid for with government money. Government better use them every last minute they get. I think taking retreats out of town just doesn't make good sense. It's not responsible government, and you should never take the people's business away from the people. You should never take the people's business away from the people, ever.
We're considered a distraction. That's why they want to leave here. That's what we were told. That
Okay,
somehow-
and listen, I've listened to that argument for years. I want y'all to think about this. How can you be distracted by your boss? How can you be distracted by the very people that you're elected to represent? It just doesn't make any sense. Retreats are probably the thing that I think are the most irresponsible thing that local governments do. They're planning, they say it's a planning retreat, they're planning people's business. And that's where a lot of the real business gets done now. All right, we gotta quit. Ask, I'm gonna walk, you keep asking, I'm listening.
Since 24 hours are required for notice of a public meeting, is it okay if the legal organ only comes out once a week and the notice is given to them within 24 hours of the meeting, even if the publication does not come out until the day of the meeting or afterwards?
Right. The 24-hour requirement is for a special called meeting. They do have to notice the public, they do have to public notice the legal organ. However, the legal organ's not even required to publish it, they're just required to give it to them.
Right.
And they're also required to publish it in a conspicuous place, whatever that means. It's not good law.
So if it's not a called meeting, there's
There's a 3-day notice.
3 days.
otherwise it's supposed to be 3 days?
Right.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, I am going to wrap up, and I apologize, but pointing to Holly, at least if you're going that way, if you're going toward Atlanta, is that Atlanta that way? It's not good. The Blue Book, these books are free. The Blue Book is for law enforcement. This is law enforcement records. Your access to police reports, incident reports, mugshots. That's the Blue Book. The Red Book. The Red Book is the Open Records and the Open Meetings Act. There is a sort of some overview in the front, but the great thing about this book, and the reason it's of value to you, and I'd say that this is the most important resource you can have, is this is the actual law. This is the codified law. This isn't Jim Zachary's view of open government. This isn't the Georgia First Amendment's foundation of open government. This is the law itself. And so, you know what? You don't have to be a lawyer to read the law. So get a copy of the law, have it, keep it, and I would suggest every elected official ought to have a copy of the law. So thank you guys very, very, very much.